What's up? Doc Mike. Public Health on Call. By Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. Today's topic for April 27, 2021. Earth Day, Why COVID-19 Has Caused an Increase in Ocean Pollution. Thank you, Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health.
Welcome to Season 3 of Public Health on Call, a podcast from the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. I'm Josh Sharfstein, Vice Dean for Public Health Practice and Community Engagement, and a former Secretary of Maryland's Health Department. Our goal is to bring scientific evidence and experience to the public health news of the day through informative interviews with scientists, community leaders, policy experts, public health officials, clinicians, and more. If you have ideas or questions for us to cover, please email us at publichealthquestion@jhu.edu. That's publichealthquestion@jhu.edu for future podcast episodes.
Hi, I'm Lindsay Smith-Rogers, producer of Public Health on Call. Today, Stephanie Desmond talks to conservationist Teal Phelps-Bondaroff about the damage that COVID-19 has done to the oceans. They discuss how discarded face masks are ending up as added plastic pollution and how efforts to reduce single-use plastics such as bags and straws are being put on hold because of the pandemic. Let's listen.
Teal Phelps-Bondaroff, thanks so much for joining me.
Great to talk to you.
So we're going to talk today about ocean pollution and really the increase in ocean pollution that we're seeing because of COVID-19. I hadn't thought that there was a connection, but there seems to be one. Could you talk about that a little for me?
Yeah, so I'm the Director of Research for Oceans Asia. We're a marine conservation organization based out of Hong Kong. And last February, so it's been a full year, which is great. It's been a long haul here. But at the end of last February, we started finding masks on our test beach. We have a beach in the remote islands in the Soko Islands, which is south of Lantau in Hong Kong. And we were doing regular bi-weekly plastic surveys. And we started encountering face masks. And we're not talking about one or two. We're talking about like dozens of face masks. My colleague collected 70 face masks across a 100-meter portion of beach in late February last year. And he was just out last week and just showed me a huge sack of face masks that he collected. So basically, marine plastic pollution has been a long-term ongoing problem in our oceans, but we're really noticing the impact of PPE or personal protective equipment on our beaches and in our oceans today. And it's all single-use plastic items that are washing up on our beaches.
And so you're talking about basically not the cloth masks, but the single-use masks, and they have plastic in them?
Well, some of the cloth masks may also have plastic. We have this idea that cloth may not necessarily be plastic. Cloth is sort of a catch-all term for fabric, and that could be cotton, it can be hemp, but it can also be polypropylene or other products. The surgical masks, those blue or white masks that people see often will wear, the single-use masks, those are made from a melt-blown polypropylene, so it's plastic, but they're also made from different materials as well. So you'll have like a cotton elastic strap around the ears, metal in the nose piece, which also makes them very hard to recycle and dispose of properly. But they're made from melt-blown polypropylene, which in addition to being single-use plastic, breaks up really quickly into smaller pieces and becomes microplastic, which has a huge impact on marine ecosystems.
So you have quantified this in a recent report. Could you tell us sort of what you think you've seen?
Yeah, so what happened after we sort of broke the story about PPE on beaches in Hong Kong was everyone was asking us questions, and we're always happy to talk about the impact of marine plastic pollution. But the one question we couldn't answer was how many face masks are entering our ocean. So our research team set about trying to answer that question. And we've estimated, and I'll explain the formula in a second, but we've estimated that 1.56 billion face masks entered our ocean in 2020.
Wow.
And the way that we arrived at that number was we looked at the global production levels, which are about 52 billion face masks made last year, at conventional loss rates from the literature. And most scientists suggest that 3% of plastic that's produced will enter our oceans, and that's a conservative estimate. And we just ran the math. And so we think this is quite a conservative estimate, only because like a 3% loss rate is very low. Some jurisdictions with not very effective waste management systems may see a loss rate of up to more than 23%. So 3% is very conservative. And and that averages out to about 4,600 to 6,000 metric tons of plastic entering our oceans just in the form of masks.
And that's just a fraction, of course, of the rest of the plastic pollution we're seeing. But it's a growing proportion.
It's quite literally the tip of the iceberg. So you're quite right. So the estimates suggest that 8 million metric tons of plastic enter our ocean each year. So this is a tiny fraction of that. And I mean, that plastic has a huge impact on ecosystems and wildlife. It kills an estimated 100,000 marine mammals and sea turtles each year, a million seabirds, and an incalculable number of fish and invertebrates and other marine wildlife. And it's one of those things where I think the face masks serve as a great way of communicating the broader problem of marine plastic pollution. We tend to notice face masks. They're bright, they're light, they're a new and novel form of pollution. Whereas I feel like a lot of folks have like litter blindness, where you walk down the street and you've seen cigarette butts a ton, and so they kind of blend into the urban landscape, but a mask stands out. And so we hopefully are using communication around lost face masks as a way of talking about the bigger problem, which is plastic pollution in general.
Mm-hmm. And that's been a growing problem.
It has been. I mean, so in 2018, humans made 359 million metric tons of plastic. And when that plastic isn't properly disposed of, and a significant percentage of it isn't recycled. So, for example, only 9% of plastic in the United States is actually recycled, even though it has a little recycling logo on it. And so as a result, that ends up somewhere, and it flows into our oceans and enters the water system. And that plastic doesn't go away. We have this idea that the plastic breaks up and disappears. It doesn't. It becomes microplastics, small, tiny pieces of plastic that then enter the food web at every level. And one of the things that I found quite eye-opening doing the research for our report on the subject was the ubiquity of microplastic. There was a report that came out about 2 weeks before we hit publish, which found microplastic in the snow in Mount Everest.
Wow.
And the one example I bring up often is while we were working on the project, a new species was discovered in the Marianas Trench, 20,000 feet down, one of the deepest trenches in the ocean. It was a new crustacean species. And, when scientists have the opportunity to name a new species, they ought to name it after their supervisor or a monarch or some prominent feature. Or my favorite one is, I think, Gary Larson, the cartoonist, was a tick was named after him. But in this case, the scientists named this new species after the plastic they found in its gut. They found a chunk of PET in its stomach, and so they named it Urethanes plasticus. So that's how ubiquitous plastic is. Wow. It's been found in sea spray, in table salt, in fish destined for people's plates. And that's the big problem of marine plastic pollution. It enters our oceans, it doesn't go away, and it impacts ecosystems in a wide range of ways.
So we were making some progress, I feel, against single-use plastics leading up to the pandemic. I know that there were a lot of places that were banning plastic straws, that there were a lot of places banning plastic bags. That's taken a hit, I understand, during the pandemic. I guess people have other things on their minds. And also I understand that, all that takeout that we're doing is really adding to the burden.
Yeah, a lot of jurisdictions rolled back or paused their efforts to reduce single-use plastics to the point where, at least here, I live in Canada and work remotely, some of the shopping stores or the grocery stores were prohibiting you from bringing your own reusable bags. Coffee places were prohibiting people from bringing reusable mugs. And many countries like the UK paused their efforts to ban single-use plastic bags and other items like that. There is a perception that plastic is more hygienic. And so there's a couple of factors that you've seen during COVID. There's the direct increase in plastic pollution from PPE and face masks and gloves and face shields. But there's also been an increase in just consumption of plastic in general. So folks are eating out more. They're getting takeaway more often than eating out. And as a result, the takeaway has more plastic and packaging and cutlery and things like that. And there's also been a lot of reports around illegal dumping as well that have arisen. And the fourth thing is that a lot of waste management systems have become overwhelmed by the sheer volume of plastic, which has resulted in spillage and loss, which means plastic enters the environment. And one of the hopes that we have is that as we sort of move out of the pandemic, that countries will step up their efforts to continue to roll back our dependence on single-use plastic, because we really do need to make change. And there was a lot of change that was rolled back as a result of the pandemic. And if we don't act now, that plastic is still in our ocean. Like, we're finding bottles on the beach that could have been tossed out of someone's car in the 1980s. It doesn't go away. And that's part of the difficult problem. And so there's some encouraging aspects. So for example, Canada promised to ban a range of single-use plastic items and stayed committed to that during the pandemic. I'm still waiting for the final announcements around it. That was promising, but it's really important that governments do step up, because we have seen a lot of rolling back of important measures.
I've been feeling guilty myself, when I look at after a takeout meal and I look at all the different containers that are on my kitchen table and they all go straight into the trash because they're usually not recyclable, it makes me cringe knowing that I'm someone who has always tried to do my best. I know that I haven't brought reusable bags to the grocery store because they've told us not to. And so I'm recycling the plastic bags, but I know that that's not solving the problem. So I wonder if it's going to take a lot of work to get us back to where we were even, a year and a half ago.
It is going to take a lot of work. And it's also worth noting that where we were a year and a half ago wasn't enough, right? So there are reusable and sustainable alternatives for every single-use plastic item that's out there, whether it's cutlery, even disposable cutlery. I was at an event 3 years ago, a figure skating event at University of British Columbia, and they had compostable plates that were made out of banana leaves. Totally reasonable. Those products are all out there, and we really do need to step up our efforts. So the baseline of the pre-COVID baseline just wasn't enough because we were still seeing massive amounts of plastic flooding our oceans. So it's critical that we actually ramp up our efforts as we move out of the pandemic. But yeah, the great thing is there are some amazing products out there. So for everything that you need, whether it's a toothbrush or a bag or cutlery or plates, there's alternatives for that. And not only are they good for the planet, but they're also good for you, and they're good for local businesses. You see this innovation around different products. And one of the examples that we've been looking at are single-use face masks. There's still a need for them. There definitely is, right? If you're in a hospital setting, various medical settings, please, obviously wear a mask. And we've seen a lot of innovation around alternative materials. So there are single-use masks that are compostable, that are made of hemp, that are made of tree fiber, waste products from sugar processing they've made masks around those. So there's a lot of potential for innovation, and that's great too because you see industries like the sugar production industry getting its waste products transformed into usable things that we all need. So that's a very useful thing. But the other, when we're talking about different solutions, as individuals, we have a role to play in the way we consume products. So turning towards alternatives, but governments also have a role to play. So right now you see this imbalance of support. So I can find at a dollar store a cheap toothbrush for $1, but if I want a bamboo toothbrush, I'm going to have to spend much more money for that. And that creates a huge problem where people with lower incomes can't afford those products. And we actually see a huge amount of plastic linked to people who are in countries that are trying to develop because you get caught in this trap where you just can't afford the alternatives. So governments have a role to play in sort of helping take fingers off scales to make sure that it's a level playing field, or supporting companies and industries that are trying to be more sustainable. And that takes different policy approaches depending on where you are. But it's really important that we take those steps because right now there's a lot of subsidy and indirect support going for plastic producers, and that doesn't help out emerging companies that are trying to produce sustainable alternatives.
What's the one thing that surprised you the most during COVID when it comes to plastic in the ocean?
Ooh, that's a really good question. I think if I reflect on it, I probably wasn't surprised that we're seeing an influx in plastic, just given our current waste habits. I think the one that kind of surprised me was how quickly the masks break up into microplastic. So the masks that we were finding in late February of last year were all complete masks. They'd clearly wafted into the ocean or been jettisoned. But more recently, my colleagues in Hong Kong are reporting finding chunks of masks. And the mask doesn't disappear. It just becomes microplastic. But that's really worrisome because that means that the microplastics are entering the food web very quickly. So masks will take about 450 years to completely break down and actually properly disappear, but that entire time they're serving as microplastic moving through the food web. So that was kind of a thing I found quite surprising. I was also kind of surprised, and I guess in a positive way, about the response that we've received. So people are responding. Countries have stepped up their efforts. So whether that's increasing accessibility to public waste disposal or addressing flaws in waste management systems, there's been some promising examples. Not enough. We do need more measures to be taken, but it's been nice to see countries kind of stepping up and recognizing this as a problem. And I think it's also been nice as humans to see people recognizing that we can fight one problem and try not to create other problems at the same time. And that kind of complexity of cause and effect. It's nice that we're kind of starting to get better at that these days.
Mm-hmm. I will say, as someone who tries to recycle, at least here in the US, I find the recycling system confusing. All the little numbers and just because there's a number on the bottom doesn't mean it's actually recyclable in my local recycling. So how can we fix that? I mean, that's obviously a bigger picture thing, but I've always been troubled by the fact that I'm trying, but I happen to know that not every number can be recycled in my local recycling bin.
Yeah, and this is a huge problem. As I mentioned, only 9% of plastic in the US is actually recycled. So even if it has a little recycling logo on it, like you said, there may not be the facilities where you live to actually recycle that product. One of the quick aside is that right as we were doing the research on this, new studies have come out that show sources of plastic pollution. And for the longest time, the rivers that produce the most plastic pollution, the vast majority of them were found in Southeast Asia. So a lot of the finger pointing was being done towards China. But of course, the secondary question is, well, where did that plastic come in the first place? Well, it turns out that Canada, United States, Western Europe were actually shipping a lot of their plastic for, in air quotes, recycling to China as a way of sort of like shifting the burden into the different countries. And China's waste management system was being overwhelmed, and they've actually stopped receiving waste from other countries for processing so they can get a handle on their own waste. It's a tough question because it has lots of different answers. We do need to improve our local waste management systems, but critically, we need to reduce our production of plastic. We're always talking to folks about, well, can we do beach cleanups? Yes, beach cleanups are important. But at the same time, it's a Sisyphean effort. You're quite literally collecting plastic, a new wave comes in, there's more plastic. You have to shut off the flow of plastic at the source. And that means reducing our consumption of plastic in general. Having the fact that something can be recycled is great, but at the same time, if that thing doesn't exist, you don't have to go to the waste and expense of recycling it. And this actually comes down to one critical thing, which is packaging. A huge amount of plastic waste comes from packaging. And packaging is kind of, in many sense, it's definitely overblown in many places. I'm sure you can come up with some examples of, single vegetables in the marketplace wrapped in plastic, or, excessive packaging on various products. Packaging is used for such a short period of time. So the plastic in my phone, I'll keep my phone for a few years. That's a pretty good use of that plastic. Even the plastic in like a toothbrush, you use that for 6 months or however long you end up using it for. Packaging, plastic bags and packaging gets used for a couple of weeks, a couple of hours maybe. And that's a huge problem. And so one thing we can do is start reducing our use of packaging and simplifying it, or using alternatives to plastic in packaging. And that's one thing that people can really advocate for. And so, yeah, there's never one solution. We're always looking for one solution. I think the answer is really a multifaceted approach. Individuals can step up, local governments can step up, and international. There's a room for international cooperation as well. A lot of international agreements around plastic pollution, don't address plastic. And so we really need targeted international agreements in that respect, or regional agreements as well.
Teal Phelps Bondaroff, I think we could talk about this all day. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me on, and just encouraging folks to reduce their consumption of plastic.
Public Health on Call is produced by Josh Sharfstein, Lindsay Smith-Rogers, and Stephanie Desmond. Audio production by Spencer Greer, Niall Owen McCusker, C.N. Oates, and Matthew Martin, with support from Chip Hickey. Distribution by Nick Moran. Production support from Catherine Ricardo and Neiman Outland. Social media support from Brenda Haggader, Grace Holes Fernandez, and Caroline Wong. Thank you for listening.